Cybercop, otherwise known as Corporation in other regions, is one of the earliest examples of first-person shooters to be released on consoles, with it releasing originally on the Sega Mega Drive in 1992, that provided a distinctive 3D core aesthetic that was revolutionary for its time, and this was even before the days of Doom that would release a year later in 93 on other platforms than the PC. But it was an interesting concept to see a real 3D world be brought to life where you can navigate it in a different context to what you would see in typical 2D games or platformers. So this game has a distinct story tied to it as well, where you're trapped inside of like a prison set in a futuristic environment, and your goal is to escape. So you have to take out loads of different enemy drones, creatures, and all sorts of different threats in order to escape. But you also have to be mindful of your surroundings, as you will have gun turrets, you'll even have cameras that will be checking out to see where you are, and you have to find a specific set of items like keys and other resources in order to get out or escape. But if you don't manage to do that, well, it's game over from that point. So there is a lot of strategic thinking and careful resource management that needs to be taken into account. While the movement and combat does work, the control systems, as it's one of the earliest first-person shooters that we would know to see on consoles, the control system is very clunky and repetitive and cumbersome. And even to interact with different elements, while you can shoot using some of the buttons on the controller, if you want to interact with puzzles and the like, you usually have to use a certain button or a pause menu, which will take you to a different menu or user interface where you'll have to click on buttons almost like in a point and click format in order to interact with some of the elements within the game in order to progress. Now, for beginners back in the day, that would have been a tricky scenario to overcome, and even today it's still tricky. The one thing that's noticeable right from the get-go is, yes, it is detailed with the environments, but there's not really any textures per se on the walls, apart from the likes of the 2D sprites that populate all of the areas, especially with the weapons, the drones, and the enemies that do roam around. But the walls and doorways generally are just flat, painted kind of models or assets. So in a lot of ways it can look very samey, and you can get very overwhelmed quite quickly, and you can get stumped as to where to go next, as the game doesn't provide a whole lot of context and doesn't really give you a good idea as to where to go or what to do in order to escape. It's pretty much trial and error, which was the case of these games back in the day. For its time, it does have some cool characteristics, but there are a lot of drawbacks. But it is an early experimental attempt at making 3D FPS games possible on these consoles, which we didn't think would happen for the time. And in a lot of ways, it also helped to pave the way for a lot of future entries and trends to come after it. Not the best example, bear in mind, but it is one that's worth looking at for sure, especially if you're interested in learning about the history of the FPS shooter or games of this type. This is definitely one of the earliest examples of first-person shooters to be seen on consoles. So for that reason alone, it is worth a look. Bear in mind the cumbersome controls and the challenging gameplay. But this would set the stage for some other games to release in this format on the system, while there is only a few of them to name. But they are also worth taking a look at, which we can do so in this next video.